Hi friends, welcome to part 2 of my program on Mark Twain. Friends, in the first part I had taken you through Mark Twain's early life, his education, writing, his professional career and his struggle. Let's now talk a little more about his writing. Twain began his career writing light, humorous verses, but he became a chronicler of vanities, hypocrisies, and murderous acts of mankind. At mid career, he combined rich humor, sturdy narrative, and social criticism in Huckleberry Finn. He was a master in rendering colloquial speech and helped to create and popularize distinctive American literature built on American themes and language. Many of his works have been suppressed at times for various reasons. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn has been repeatedly restricted in American high schools, not least for its frequent use of the word nigger, which was in common usage in the pre-Civil War period in which the novel was set. A complete bibliography of Twain's work is nearly impossible to compile because of the vast number of pieces he had written, often in obscure newspapers, and his use of several different pen names. He was quite a freaky guy. I mean, whenever he felt, he wrote under any particular name, any pseudonym he used. Additionally, a large portion of his speeches and lectures have been lost or were not recorded. Thus, the compilation of Twain's work is an ongoing process. Researchers rediscovered published material as recently as 1995 and even 2015. Twain wrote for the Territorial Enterprise, a Virginia City newspaper, in 1863 when he met lawyer Tom Fitch, editor of the competing newspaper Virginia Daily Union, known as the Silver-Tongued Orator of the Pacific. Twain became a writer of the Sagebrush School. He was later known as its most favorite or famous member. His first important work was the celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, published in New York. It was published in the New York Saturday Press on November 18, 1865. After a burst of popularity, the Sacramento Union commissioned him to write letters about his travel experiences. The first journey that he took for this job was to ride the steamer Ajax on its maiden voyage to the Sandwich Islands, which is present-day Hawaii. All the while he was writing letters to the newspaper that were meant for publishing and chronicling his experiences with humor. These letters proved to be the genesis of his work with the San Francisco Alta California newspaper that designated him as a traveling correspondent for a trip from San Francisco to New York City via Panama Isthmus. On June 8, 1867, he set sail on the pleasure cruiser Quaker City for 5 months. This trip, Quaker City, by the way, is Philadelphia. This trip resulted in completion of his travel book, The Innocents Abroad, or The New Pilgrim's Progress, published in 1869. In 1872, he published his second piece of travel literature, Roughing It, as an account of his journey from Missouri to Nevada, his subsequent life in the American West, and his visit to Hawaii. The book lampoons American and Western society in the same manner that Innocents critiqued the various countries of Europe and the Middle East. His next work was The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today, his first attempt at writing a novel. The book, written with his neighbor Charles Dudley Warner, is also his only collaboration. Twain's next work drew on his experiences on the Mississippi River. Old Times on the Mississippi was a series of sketches published in the Atlantic Monthly in 1875, featuring his disillusionment with romanticism. Old Times eventually became the starting point for life on the Mississippi. Twain's next major publication was The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which draws on his youth in Hannibal when he was a child. Tom Sawyer was modeled on Twain as a child with braces of schoolmates John Briggs and Will Bowen. The book also introduces Huckleberry Finn in a supporting role based on Twain's boyhood friend Tom Blankenship. The Prince and the Pauper was not as well received despite a storyline or filmy storyline tha uska that is common in film and literature today. The book tells the story of two boys born on the same day who are physically identical, acting as a social commentary as the Prince and Pauper switch places. Twain had started Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which he consistently had problems completing, and that included that even went close to failure of his nerves. So he was under tremendous pressure and had instead completed his travel book, A Tramp by the name of A Tramp Abroad, which describes his travels through Central and Southern Europe. Twain's next major published work was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which confirmed him as a noteworthy American writer. Some have called it the first great American novel, and the book has become required reading in many schools throughout the United States. Someday probably I'll cover this book for you, friends. Huckleberry Finn was an offshoot from Tom Sawyer. Near the completion of Huckleberry Finn, Twain wrote Life on Mississippi, which is said to have heavily influenced his novel on his biography. The travel work recounts Twain's memories and new experiences after a 22-year absence, I would say, from Mississippi River when he used to be a child. In his later writings, Twain produced President Ulysses S. Grant's memoirs through his fledglingly publishing house. He also wrote the private history of a campaign that failed for the Century magazine. He next focused on Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, written with the same historical fiction style as The Prince and the Pauper. Connecticut Yankee showed the absurdities of political and social norms by setting them in the court of King Arthur. The book was started in December 1885, then shelved a few months later until the summer of 1887, and eventually it came to life in the spring of 1889. His next large-scale work was Pudd'n Wilson, which he wrote rapidly as he was desperately trying to stave off bankruptcy. From November 12 to December 14, 1893, Twain wrote 60,000 words for the novel, which is fairly decent. It was first published serially in Century magazine, and when it was finally published in book form, Pudd'n Wilson appeared as the main title. However, the subtleties make the entire title read The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson and the Comedy of the Extraordinary Twins. Twain's next venture was a work of straight fiction that he called Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc and dedicated it to his wife. He had long said that this was the work that he was most proud of, despite the criticism that he received for it. The book had been a dream of his since childhood, and he claimed that he had found a manuscript detailing the life of Joan of Arc when he was an adolescent. This was another piece that he was convinced about would save his publishing company. His financial advisor, Henry Huttleston Rogers, squashed that idea and got Twain out of that business altogether, but the book was published nonetheless. To pay the bills and keep his business projects afloat, Twain had begun to write articles and commentary furiously with diminishing returns, but it was not enough. He filed for bankruptcy in 1894. During this time of dire financial straits, he published several literary reviews in newspaper to make his ends meet. Twain's wife died in 1904. After some time had passed, he published some works that his wife, his de facto editor and censor throughout their married life, had looked down upon. The Mysterious Stranger is perhaps the best known, depicting various visits of Saturn to Earth. This particular work was not published in Twain's lifetime. His manuscripts included 3 versions written between 1897 and 1905. The so-called Hannibal, Asseldorf and print shop versions. Twain's last work was his autobiography, which he dictated and thought would be most entertaining if he went off on whims and tangents in non-chronological order. Some archivists and compilers have rearranged the biography into a more conventional form and style, thereby eliminating some of Twain's intrinsic humor and the flow of his book. Twain's works have been subjected to censorship efforts. According to Stewart, 2013, leading these banning campaigns generally were religious organizations or individuals in positions of influence, which happens even today. In 1905, the Brooklyn Public Library banned both the Adventures of Tom Sawyer and the children's and Huckleberry Finn from the children's department because of their language. Twain's views became more radical as he grew older. From 1901, soon after his return from Europe until his death in 1910, Twain was vice president of the American Anti-Imperialist League, which opposed the annexation of the Philippines by the United States and had tens of thousands of members. He wrote many political pamphlets for the organization. During the Philippine-American War, Twain wrote a short pacifist story also titled The War Prayer, which makes the point that humanism and Christianity's preaching of love are incompatible with the conduct of the war. Twain was an adamant supporter of the abolition of slavery and emancipation of slaves. About India, he said, "So far as I am able to judge, nothing has been left undone, either by name or nature, to make India the most extraordinary country that the sun visits on his rounds." So that's the kind of feeling he had for India, where every prospect pleases and only man is wild. Twain was also a staunch supporter of women's rights and an active campaigner for women's suffrage. Twain created a reverent portrayal of Joan of Arc, a subject over which he had obsessed for 45 years, studied for a dozen years, and spent 2 years writing about it. In 1900 and again in 1908, he stated, "I like Joan of Arc best of all my books. It is the best." Those who knew Twain well late in life recount that he dwelt on the subject of afterlife, his daughter Clara saying, "Sometimes he believed death ended everything, but most of the time he felt sure of life beyond." Twain was opposed to vivisection practice of performing operations on live animals. His objection was not on a scientific basis, but rather an ethical one. He specifically cited the pain caused to the animal as his basis for this particular opposition. Twain used different pen names before deciding on Mark Twain. He signed humorous and imaginative sketches as Josh until 1863. Additionally, he used the pen name of Thomas Jefferson Snodgrass for a series of humorous letters. While Twain is often depicted wearing a white suit, modern representations suggesting that he wore them throughout his life are unfounded. Evidence suggests that Twain began wearing white suits on the lecture circuit after the death of his wife Olivia in 1904. So that's all about Mark Twain. He was a great guy. He wrote so beautifully, and he has left all the treasure for us to enjoy. That's all I have for today, friends. Goodbye and see you soon.